You never really expect life to take strange turns, do you? You live in this bubble, this comfortable routine, and one day, something or someone comes along and suddenly everything you thought you knew about yourself changes. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. My name is Isabella, and if you've clicked on this video, you're about to hear a story that I've kept hidden for years. A secret that, until today, has been weighing on my conscience. It all started about 2 years ago. My husband Richard had been traveling a lot for work. And by traveling, I mean he was gone more than he was home. We'd gotten so used to him being away that when he was home, it felt almost strange. Like we were strangers living in the same house. Our marriage wasn't unhappy, just distant. Or so I thought. And then Joshua came into the picture. Joshua was our son's best friend. He had always been around, growing up with our boy, having sleepovers, spending weekends in our house. You know, the typical teenage friendship. But as time passed, Joshua grew older. He was no longer that shy, awkward kid with braces. He matured, tall, confident, and surprisingly charismatic. Not that I was paying attention, or at least I told myself I wasn't. One afternoon, my son Michael and his friends were off on a weekend camping trip. They'd planned it for weeks, and of course Joshua was going. Richard had left early that morning for a business trip that would take him out of town for at least a week. I had the house to myself, a rare occurrence that I was looking forward to. It was Saturday, and everything seemed peaceful. I decided to spend the afternoon reading in the backyard, enjoying the quiet. But around noon, my phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Joshua. His message was simple. "Can I stop by?" Something came up. At first, I hesitated. He was supposed to be with Michael, but I figured maybe something had gone wrong with their trip. I agreed, thinking it would be a quick conversation. Nothing more. He arrived about 20 minutes later. I expected him to look worried, maybe upset, but he was calm, almost too calm. He walked in, thanking me with that familiar, charming smile. "Where's Michael?" I asked, curious. "He's still on the trip. I came back early. Just needed a break from the guys," he replied casually, his eyes locking with mine for just a second longer than usual. I should have seen the warning signs, the subtle hints, but I didn't. Joshua started talking about life, how he was going through some tough times, how his relationship with his girlfriend wasn't what he expected it to be. I listened, offering the usual advice, trying to be the mature, caring adult. But somewhere along the line, the conversation shifted. "I've always admired how you handle things, Isabella," he said, his tone lower, more personal. I laughed it off, feeling slightly uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm just doing my best like everyone else." But then he said something that caught me completely off guard. "No, I mean it. There's something different about you. You understand things in a way that most people don't." His gaze was intense now, and for the first time, I felt a strange tension in the air. I stood up, brushing it off. "Well, thank you, Joshua. I'm sure you're just being kind." But he didn't back down. Instead, he took a step closer. I'm not just saying it to be kind. I felt this way for a while. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure how to respond, but I knew I had to diffuse the situation. "Joshua, you should really be heading home. It's getting late, and I'm sure Michael will wonder where you are." He didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on mine, and for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just an innocent conversation. Something was happening here. Something that I wasn't prepared for. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've always felt a connection with you, Isabella," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like you get me in a way that no one else does." I froze. This wasn't happening. This was my son's best friend. This was Joshua, the kid I'd seen grow up in my house. And yet, here he was, standing in front of me, speaking words I never thought I'd hear. I needed to end this. "Now, Joshua, you need to leave. This isn't right," I said, trying to sound firm. but there was a trembling in my voice that gave me away. He took another step forward, his face inches from mine now. "You can't tell me you don't feel it too," he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. I backed away, shaking my head, but I couldn't deny that there was something there. Something dangerous. Something I hadn't felt in years. Suddenly, my phone rang, breaking the silence between us. It was Richard. I quickly picked up, my voice shaking slightly as I answered. "Hey, how's the trip going?" I asked, forcing a smile, though my heart was racing. Richard's voice was calm, oblivious to the storm brewing in our home. "It's fine. I just wanted to check in. I'll be home sooner than expected. Tomorrow evening, actually." My stomach dropped. Tomorrow? Less than 24 hours. I hung up the phone, turning to Joshua, who was still standing there, his eyes burning with something I couldn't quite place. "Joshua, you need to go. Now." My voice was firmer this time, though I could still feel the tension between us. He nodded slowly, finally backing away. "All right, I'll go," he said, his voice softer now. But before he left, he looked back at me, his eyes filled with something I didn't want to name. "I'll see you around, Isabella," he said, his words lingering in the air long after he had walked out the door. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering how on earth things had gotten so out of control. How had I let it get this far? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with everything that had happened. Joshua's words echoed in my head. "I've always felt a connection with you. How did things get so twisted? He was my son's best friend. This wasn't supposed to happen." I kept telling myself that it wasn't real, that I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. Morning came and Richard texted me to say he'd be home by the evening. Normally, I would have been excited. I loved when he came home after being away for so long. But this time, I felt unsettled. I hadn't even told him about Joshua's visit yet, and I didn't know how to explain it without making things sound worse than they were. Or maybe deep down, I knew how bad it already was. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened the door and saw Joshua standing there, my heart dropped into my stomach. "Joshua, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I needed to see you. I needed to explain," he said, stepping inside before I could stop him. I shut the door behind him, my mind racing. "You shouldn't be here. Richard is coming home today." "I know. That's why I came. I needed to talk to you before he gets back," he said, his voice low and urgent. I crossed my arms, trying to put some distance between us. "Joshua, there's nothing to talk about. What happened yesterday was a mistake. You need to go before—" He interrupted me, his eyes intense. "No, you don't understand. I can't stop thinking about you, Isabella. I've felt this way for months, but I didn't know how to tell you. And now that I have, I can't just pretend it didn't happen." My breath caught in my throat. This was worse than I thought. He wasn't just confused, he was serious. And as much as I wanted to believe that this was just a crush, I could see in his eyes that it was more than that. "Joshua, you're young. This is just a phase. You're confused, and that's okay. But you need to let it go. Nothing can happen between us. Nothing will happen between us," I said, trying to sound firm. But he wasn't listening. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You feel it too, don't you? I know you do. You're just scared to admit it." My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But the truth was, I didn't know what I felt anymore. There was something there, some kind of tension that I couldn't explain. But I knew it was wrong. I knew I had to stop this before it went any further. "Joshua, please, you need to leave. Richard will be home soon, and this isn't—" Before I could finish, the front door clicked open. My blood ran cold. Richard was home. He was early. Joshua froze, his eyes widening as the sound of footsteps echoed through the house. My heart raced as I tried to think of something, anything to explain why Joshua was here. But before I could say a word, Richard walked into the room, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Hey, I'm home. I thought I'd surprise you by coming a bit earlier," Richard said, his voice warm and cheerful. But then, his gaze shifted to Joshua. His smile faltered. "Joshua? What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" For a moment, none of us spoke. The tension in the room was unbearable. Joshua stood frozen, his face pale, while I struggled to find the right words. "Oh, Joshua just stopped by to pick up something he left here a while ago. He was just about to leave," I said, forcing a smile, praying that Richard wouldn't notice the panic in my voice. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly confused, but he didn't press the issue. "Well, it's good to see you, Joshua. But yeah, you probably should head out. Isabella and I have some catching up to do." Joshua nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact with both of us. "Yeah, I was just leaving. I'll see you later," he mumbled before rushing out the door. The moment he left, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Richard didn't seem to notice my anxiety. He was too busy unpacking his bags and telling me about his trip. I tried to act normal, to pretend that nothing was wrong, but my mind was spinning. What had just happened? How had things spiraled so far out of control? Later that night, as Richard slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't let this go on. Whatever had happened between Joshua and me, it needed to end now. The next day, I sent Joshua a message. "We need to talk." He showed up at the house that afternoon, and this time I made sure Richard wasn't around. When he walked in, I didn't waste any time. "Joshua, this needs to stop. Whatever you're feeling, it's not real. It's just a crush, and it's going to pass. But you can't come here anymore. You can't contact me anymore. This has to end." He looked at me, his expression pained. "Isabella, No, Joshua. This isn't up for discussion. You need to move on. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste your time on something that can never be. You understand that, right?" For a long moment, he didn't say anything. But finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yeah, I get it." I could see the hurt in his eyes, but I knew this was the only way. I had to put an end to this, for both of our sakes. And as I watched him walk out the door for the last time, I felt a strange mix of relief and regret. In the weeks that followed, things slowly returned to normal. Joshua stopped coming around, and Michael never suspected a thing. Richard was none the wiser, and life went on as if nothing had ever happened. But deep down, I knew that I'd come dangerously close to crossing a line I could never come back from. And while I'd managed to stop it before it went too far, the memory of those days lingered in the back of my mind. A reminder of how easily life can unravel, and how sometimes the most dangerous temptations are the ones you never see coming.